these immersive experiences on steroids. These are going to be hugely popular. Anytime you can engage people with your art, it's always going to help you succeed. Well, hey there, it's Miriam Schulman, and welcome to the Inspiration Place. As you can see, I am not in New York City. I am at a writer's retreat in Amelia Island, Florida, which is right near Jacksonville. I actually spent 8 years of my childhood in Florida, and so the Spanish moss behind me reminds me of my childhood. So I'm feeling at home here. I love the warm weather, and I have so many ideas to share with you. So while I'm at this retreat, which is for writers, and it's being led by my writer coach, Candace L. Davis. It's more like a writer residency, though, where we have plenty of time to write and think and relax. And they provide like the space and the community. And while I'm working on my book, which you've been hearing about, have not gotten a book contract yet. I've already sent in my proposal to HarperCollins. I'm waiting right now to hear yes or no if they want to publish it. And if they don't, I'll cry a few tears, but I'll be looking for a new publisher. It's not a big deal. Somebody's going to want to publish my second book. But as I'm working on the second book, and as I'm in conversation with people, I'm realizing that there is content that I have shared with you that belong in the book, and there's content that I haven't shared with you yet that you need to know. And one of the questions somebody asked me, her name is Jasmine. She's not an artist and she's not a business coach either. She helps activists with their message, which is very much needed right now, as you can imagine. She's in a very vulnerable place. But anyway, Jasmine was asking me, what kind of art do people want right now? And I'm not sure if that's the way she asked it, but that's the way I chose to answer it. I said, like, what is it that people are going to want to consume? And I did have an answer for her. So there is art that is evergreen art that people are going to want no matter what. Pet portraits, family portraits. There are styles of art that people will appreciate no matter what. There are styles that will evolve with time, though, depending on what's happening. And this is not about not being a true artist, because what I'm going to do during this episode is I'm going to share with you how art is always in conversation with the world around us. And I'm only going to focus on this century and the last one. I'm not going to go way, way back, but I want to show you how what's happening now in the world is definitely going to affect the kind of art that people want to consume. And by art, I'm using art in the most general way, because all art is always in conversation. Art is in conversation with fashion. It's in conversation with world events, with politics. It's in conversation with decor. It's in conversation with literature, dance, music, all the arts, all the expressive arts are always going to be in conversation. Okay, so what I'm going to share with you is how art, like I said, cultural arts has responded to world events in the past, how it's responding right now, and what I'm predicting for 2025. Okay. And to be a successful artist, you have to create art that people want, not just what you want, but what they want. That doesn't mean you're necessarily changing your style, but you need to be creative and in conversation with the world around you. All right, so let's talk first about the 1920s. This is right after World War I. So people had a sense of liberation. They had a sense of rebellion against traditional values during this time. And so because of those world events, that affected art. We also had a period of economic prosperity. It was a booming economy. There was a lot of consumerism. There was a lot of leisure time. There was also, of course, prohibition. So the ban on alcohol in the US led to the rise of speakeasies, which became a place for jazz and dance styles. So let's talk about now. So those were the big things that were happening culturally in the world. And let's look at how that affected art. So you had the rise of jazz music. You had popularity of dances like the Charleston and the Lindy. You had the Art Deco movement, which affected art as well as design and architecture. You had the flapper, the style. So we moved out of like the Victorian and post-Victorian eras into relaxed waistlines. They were shedding their corsets. Women were cutting their hair. It's a very different style of look. You can think of Tamara Lapique for one of the influences. A lot of the art that I love came out of the Harlem Renaissance. I talked about that on a previous Amazon live stream. A lot of migration was happening from the South to the North to New York, and in Harlem, there was a great flowering of literary arts, music, and visual art and culture there. So think of Langston Hughes and many others, Jacob Lawrence. So there was a very specific kind of art that flowered, and literature that flowered, and musical style that flowered, and fashion and decor and architecture that all kind of flowered at the same time. Now, does that mean that if you were living in 1920, you couldn't be a traditional oil painter and make a living? Of course not. Of course you could do that. But this was what was happening. And it's harder to make a living when you're going against the grain that way. It's hard enough to be an artist. And then to like go against the grain, that's even harder. The artists that we consider now as, oh, these were the true artists, were actually part of movements. This was the movement that was happening then. Let's switch to what happened then right after that. So right after that, when we had the Depression and the crash, so now we're looking at art such dealt with social realism. We're looking at Hopper. We're looking at the Ashcan School. There's going to be some overlaps of people who are still working in the style, like during the 20s, but things are changing. Now we're changing the style of the dress, we're changing style of the architecture, we're changing different things that people are thinking about. This is also a rise of photography, documentary photography. Think about Dorothea Lange, who did the Depression era photographs. Think about the migration west. Also, you can think about Grapes of Wrath, which, by the way, I read recently that a woman had actually written all those case studies that were in Grapes of Wrath. And when he was visiting her camp, Sonora Babb interviewed people during the Dust Bowl, gathering stories, and she even had a book contract, but she shared her stories with Steinbeck, and then he published Grapes of Wrath, and then her novel for Random House got canceled. They said, why would anybody want to read your book after reading Grapes of Wrath? And he stole it from her. So yeah, a little aside, just thought you should know, especially if there's authors listening to this, don't wait to publish your thing. Speed is important. Publish your story. So back to what we're talking about, the type of art that is being in that time. So we said there's the emergence of social realism in the visual art, there's the development of swing music, there's the growth of documentary photography, and also propaganda art and posters. That was the kind of arts happening 30s and 40s. So you can see that we as artists are always in conversation with what's happening in the world. Post-World War II, 1960s, the atomic bomb had a huge influence on the arts. World War II had a huge influence. This is like a very much a time similar to post-pandemic, where people are struggling with existential questions. So this is why you had the rise of existentialism in literature. Samuel Beckett, Sartre. We have modern dance. We have Balanchine, Martha Graham. Modern art, we have the abstract expressionist, de Kooning, Helen Frankenthaler. We have modern design, the type of art that furniture design, modern design, very simple, clean lines. So all of that was in conversation with each other and affected each other. And then that was a short, like maybe a 10-year period, and then pop art rose to the top. So things are always in conversation with what's happening. Let's jump ahead now to 2020 and seeing the art of the past 4 years, because I think it's going to be easier for you to see how the events that have happened in the past 4 to 5 years have impacted the arts and everything you've been seeing the past 5 years. And that will help you understand what art are predicted as the trends for the next 5 years. Okay. So 2020 was a time where we had a global pandemic and everything shut down. So a lot of contemporary artists turned inward, and there were a lot of artists whose only source of inspiration were their own bodies. A lot of female artists used their own bodies in their art. They looked at surrealism, a lot of dystopian art. There was a lot of attention even to art that had been made previous to 2020, but was getting more attention because of what was happening. So think of different kinds of surrealist art. Like I would include science fiction and dystopian literature in movies. Like, so remember, we're talking about all the arts is all part of this. And you can see like Octavia Butler being more popular. You can see Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood's work becoming so popular now. I mean, this is the way she's always worked, and she has been popular before that, but it's like things even get more attention. People are turning to that. I see that trend continuing. I see people continuing to turn towards surrealism, dystopian, fantasy fiction, fantasy art, with or without AI as a tool. So I see that trend definitely continuing into the future. Turning back to what we've noticed the past 4 years, because of the pandemic, there were a lot of outdoor performances, exhibitions, and installations. I'm seeing that trend continuing even though the pandemic's over, you're still seeing a lot of that, the outdoor dance performances, interactive exhibitions, a lot of more collaborative approaches to art you saw in the last things. Biennale in Venice in 2022. So it was postponed because of the pandemic, and the curator, Cecilia Alemani, a woman curator, she decided to give voice to artists who had been underrepresented in the past. And there was a lot of women who were part of this, and even the ones that were contemporary people who are alive now, it was a lot of surrealist art that she was including in this Venice Biennale. A lot of artists turned inward. The theme of the Biennale that she curated was Milk of Dreams, which is after a book by the English-born Mexican surrealist artist Leonora Carrington. And I'm pretty sure I also read recently that Carrington sculptures are suddenly getting more value in auctions. But anyway, so her stories, she does like these illustrated magical tales. Everything is very multi-dimensional, multimedia. So this exhibition, so Biennale, remember that's only 22, that's only 2 years ago, is still kind of the avant-garde of art. Things are always going to pass through the upper levels of art first before emerging artists, and that trend continues. I see this trend continuing. People want escapism. So this theme of the Biennale followed these themes: body representation, because like I said, artists were turning inward and they were also using their own bodies as inspiration; metamorphosis, because people were changing during this time. She also explored, I'm talking about the Biennale, relationships with technology and relations between the body and the earth. And you're going to see that when I picked out as the 5 trends that are going to be very important in 2025 and beyond, all have something to do with these themes. Okay. The curator developed this concept through conversations with artists during the pandemic when she was planning the exhibition. In the Wikipedia, she says that the essay invokes feminist activist Sylvia Federici and science fiction writer Ursula de Guin, Guin. So I'm going to check those out later, but this is very much in what I am talking about. Let me get back to my notes. So the pandemic, clearly huge influence, Biennale showcasing all these themes, but let's talk about the next major thing that happened also in 2020. So this is the social justice movements and the artist response. So we see a huge rise of Black figurative artists. And honestly, this trend started before the social justice movement of 2020 because we had Barack and Michelle Obama as president and first lady, and they had a huge influence on the arts as well, choosing artists for the White House, people of color, choosing fashion designers, choosing decorators, people of color for that. We have Kehinde Wiley, who's chosen for the official Obama portrait, as well as Amy Sherald, who was chosen for Michelle's official portrait in the Smithsonian. But we did have this trend had started prior to the social justice movement. Just saying, like everything that happens, it's not like it just happens out of nowhere. Things start to bubble up and build the tension for it to happen when we have big movements like this inside the art market. Suddenly, there is a response and a demand in the art world for more representation in art institutions. And there was an effort to amplify marginalized voices in the art world. There was increased funding and support for BIPOC artists and organizations. So as a result, some of the hottest artists right now are figurative artists and female artists and Black female artists. So like in my book, Artpreneur, I talk about Julie Maretu. She is an Ethiopian-born artist who lives in America, who is also, by the way, half Jewish. Her art sells for millions of dollars. She had a Whitney retrospective during her lifetime, which happened, I think, during the pandemic-ish. I remember going with a mask on. And also, just of note, she recently made a grant to the Whitney, so anybody under the age of 25 can go to the Whitney for free, which I think is fantastic. I love hearing about artists who give back. She actually does not work in a figurative style. She works in an abstract style, but she is part of that wave of interest in identity politics and identity art. So people wanting to collect art by Black women, people wanting to collect women abstract expressionists who maybe were overlooked. Like suddenly their art is suddenly gaining in popularity, gaining in value. So that is a huge theme. I have a lot of examples of artists inside my Incubator program who are doing beautiful work, who are really leaning into their identities, and people who lean into their identities, they do very well. So we have Megan Mayberry, who does of hurricane headdresses, does beautiful headdresses that are very much embraced by the LGBTQ communities. We have Natasha Maricone, who does figurative art. I'm not going to be able to name all the artists off the top of my head who are in my incubator. I'm just like, mostly I think of their art before I think of their name and their face, because that's the way I think. Lots of beautiful examples of people who are doing well leaning into their identities. Okay, so there are also themes, and when I say themes, we're talking art again in the broader sense, themes related to racial justice, equity, social change, art that addresses the pandemic experience, isolation, community resilience. I think people definitely want to leave the pandemic behind. So I wouldn't create art. I wouldn't recommend that you create art addressing the pandemic experience, but themes of isolation, still relevant. Themes of resilience, very much wanted. Still going to be examples of local and community-based arts initiative. Okay, so now that we've talked about art in the past and in the last 5 years and how things that have happened, having a Black president, how that influences the art, having a pandemic, how that influences art. We're going to turn out to what's next for 2025 and beyond. I'm going to count them down. Actually, that's what I'll do. Number 5, as how I said, the surrealist trend. I see that continuing. Fantasy, sci-fi, surrealism, dystopia, all those things are going to continue to be relevant, interesting, sought after in literature, film, art, etc., with or without AI, it doesn't matter. So since I talked a lot about that, I'm going to move on. But if you think about especially what's happened with the very divisive politics in the US, with geopolitical wars in Israel, in Ukraine, people want escape. And surrealism, fantasy, dystopian all give us escape from reality. It gives us some form of comfort to escape. So there is escape into like a future that people like. So that's theme number 5. Theme 4 would be escape into the past. So this would be nostalgia-based themes. I would even say micro nostalgia. So anytime that you can escape into something, like people want to escape into the past. So yesterday's trends in tomorrow. So it's not going to be like the 90s are back, but you might get a very micro trend happening. So, for example, you might have leg warmers coming back, but not the way Jennifer Beal wore it in Flashdance with the ripped sweatshirt. It's not going to be a costume. Things can come back in a highly specific way. And so you're going to see that. I think in terms of visual artists, if you work in a more traditional medium, thinking about talking about nostalgia in your marketing messages is going to resonate with people. Okay, counting down, trend number 3. We saw a lot of immersive experiences happening. Yayoi Kusama is one who's always done this really well, and this is how she rose to fame with her immersive experiences. You think about her infinity mirrors, her polka dot rooms, all those types of experiences that she puts together where people can interact with it, hugely popular. You also saw traveling exhibitions. I didn't go to the traveling, I went to the Yayoi ones that were in New York, like at the Botanical Garden, again, outdoor, putting her art in outdoor spaces, as well as the one that I think it was with David Joyner had her exhibit with the infinity mirrors. You're going to see more of that from lots of artists, immersive experiences, and also virtual worlds, hyper-real virtual worlds. So what I was going to say before is I didn't go to the Van Gogh virtual world traveling exhibit. I didn't make it to that. I'll try to go to one of these other ones. I don't know why they just don't appeal to me as much. But think about these immersive experiences on steroids. These are going to be hugely popular. Anytime you can engage people with your art, it's always going to help you succeed. I have an artist, Daniel Trellenberg, who does this very well. When he does his art booths, he usually has an interactive piece where people can come and paint on it. We've talked about how he can move people along so that they don't spend too much time painting and not enough time buying. But anytime you can do this sort of interactive thing, it's great. I also had an artist, Susan Cohn. We can link to her episode that we did with her when she did the LA Art Fair, but she created in her booth like kind of a tunnel that they went through in a way to interact with the art. So anyway, you can do something like that. It's going to help you get more press. It's going to help you get more publicity, and it's going to help you engage with your collectors in a new way. That stuff is going to be hugely popular. So even if you are not a videographer, if you're not creating the virtual world, think about ways you can engage your audience in a more immersive experience. We actually are going to start doing that with the podcast. I've talked to my team today about how I want to have worksheets go out for people who listen to the podcast so that they can engage with the podcast in a deeper way. So if you go to Schulman Art /332, there will be a way for you to get the worksheet so you can interact with this content on a different way. And we'll be doing that for all future releases. Okay, let me get back to my notes. So we talked about counting down 5 fantasy, 4 nostalgia, 3 virtual world and immersive experience. And I'm going to put for theme number 2 as cultural mashups. You see this a lot in design. There's one designer who I met on this writing retreat. She's not writing a book. She just happened to be friends with somebody who is. But I am going to shout out her website. She is wanderlustaesthetic.com, and you can also find her on Instagram as wanderlustaesthetic. That's her Instagram handle. And her studio is based in Mexico City. And the way she was describing what she does and what I see in your design aesthetic and what you communicated to me verbally was the way you're sourcing from all over the world. And it's like this mashup that I'm talking about in the art world that is on trend right now, that is hugely important. And that should come across in all of your messaging. like the headline, the thing. It's not that you're merging different techniques, it's you're blending different cultural traditions to make it contemporary and new. Okay, so that is what I'm seeing a lot. It's going to be a trend in general in the arts, are these global mashups. All right, now we are down to our last theme. So counting down from 5 down to 1 is eco-themed and sustainable art. So as environmental consciousness grows, art that highlights sustainability is going to be huge. That does not mean the art itself, although it could be, needs to have sustainable practices. Daniel Trellenberg, who I mentioned earlier, that's a huge theme in his work. He uses sand, he uses earth, but in general, you're going to see in these trends, color trends, design, decor, art trends, wanting to go back to more earth tones, materials, mossy greens. You're going to see a lot of mossy greens, I think, in home decor in 2025, as well as in products. Kind of like peach tones combined with that green, kind of like that very earthy palette look. Not the look of the 70s of the avocado green with orange, but more of a muted, dusty type of palette. You're going to have a lot of themes that emphasize the planet's beauty. Now, does this mean you have to do modern art? No, it does not mean that. So, for example, another client of mine, Paula Christian, she does traditional watercolors, but sustainability of the planet is very important to her. She is capturing the beauty that may not always be available, and that is part of her message. And she's leaning into the messaging. So, artists, what I want you to hear is sometimes it's about directing your art in a direction that of one of these 5 major themes, but it could also be directing the message of your art in one of these themes. So I'm thinking off the top of my head of 2 different artists who I have, one who's Canadian and lives in Germany, and the other who's German who lives in the US. And they both are embracing a lot of science and sci-fi in their abstract art. So you would only really know about that in the messaging. They need to lean into that messaging because the science and the science fiction and all that stuff that they're doing is going to help people relate to their art a lot. So I've said a lot today. We're just going to do a quick recap of all 5 themes. 1, nostalgia. 2, eco-themes and sustainable art. 3, hyper-real virtual worlds and immersive experiences. 4, cultural mashups. And 5, fantasy, surrealism, and dystopia, like all that whole sci-fi surrealism stuff. Okay. So I hope you found that helpful. Let me know in the comments of the blog or reach out to me. You can comment on YouTube or on Instagram. I'm at Schulman Art there, or you can email me, miriam@theinspirationplace.net. I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of these 5 themes? How do you see yourself fitting in or not fitting in? I would love to hear from you. All right, my friend, thanks so much for listening. As I mentioned before, you can get the worksheet to the show notes over at schulmanart.com/332. I will see you same time, same place next week. Until next time, stay inspired. Bye for now.